This is the Short-Term Management Show. The show that is all about short-term rental property management, hosted by yours truly, Luke Carl. Here we are. Here we go. There you are. Look at him. Look how good looking you are on the Short-Term Management Show. My bug guy in the Smoky Mountains, Jimmy the Bug Guy, I like to call him. And Jimmy, how you doing, man?
I'm doing wonderful. Great. Enjoying the weather.
Yeah, something like that. You're in the Smokies. It's going to be getting pretty – you're going below freezing again here pretty soon, I think. We're recording this in January.
Yeah, I think so. We've had some pretty the weather's been sketchy, but some days it's sunny and warm. Yesterday was 55. Today is 30-something.
Okay,
so
great.
It's hit and miss.
Yeah, well, wintertime in the mountains. It's a wonderful thing. I'm actually in Florida right now, but I wanted to talk to you because, well, first of all, I handpicked you back in the early days of my career. I think I only had 4 or 5 houses back then, and I started calling around and I said, who's going to understand a schedule, And so I found you, and you had an iPhone. That was my first requirement. No, sorry to any Android folks out there, but I just knew we'd get along. And we had a nice conversation, and it just kind of grew from there. And I guess let's just go straight into that. Like, a big part of your business is, of course, short-term rental, and it's because you're in a short-term market. Obviously, that's probably where it spawned from. But I know you moved originally from Louisiana, so when you went to the Smokies, did you go into it thinking that you were going to be catering to cabins, or did that just kind of happen?
I actually moved here and worked for another company for about 4 years when I left Louisiana. So I wasn't really, at that point, I didn't know if I was going to actually work for myself or for somebody else. And after 4 years of that, I opened All About Bugs. And so going from there, we just kind of took it as it came, I guess. The rental market, I knew it was there, but I wasn't sure at the time if it was something that we were going to elaborate on or cause it to become larger than it was. The company that I had worked for in the past actually serviced, I thought it was just cabin companies, right? So a lot of people just would use like Ant Bugs, and their cabin would be rented by Ant Bugs. So there wasn't a lot of individual owners like doing their own management at the time when I was here. So that kind of spawned probably in the last, I'd say 5 years, 6 years. It really turned from being everybody's using management companies to everybody trying to manage their own, which then turned into trying to find your own operator, right? You're trying to find your own pest control operator who works for you direct. And we just kind of built it from there. And I think when we took you guys on, we were doing some cabins, but it wasn't, we were probably servicing maybe a couple hundred at the time. And a lot of them were actually in with cabin rental companies. And then when you guys came along, it was kind of a different experience because you had them, you managed them. And so we had to actually adjust to how we worked the schedules. You're talking about the schedule, and we had to adjust to how we worked the schedule and learning each other. And that's one of the things that I pride myself on with these cabin owners is having some kind of a relationship with them, so we know what their expectations are, how we work their schedules, how we go in between turns, checkouts, check-ins, all those things. And how do we actually receive those from you guys so that we can make our job easier? So all that in a nutshell. And we just kind of, as time went along, you have a couple hundred, and the next thing you know, you have 500. And the next thing you know, you have 2,000 of them, which is where we're at now. Is that better?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was getting at with the schedule thing, and what you mean by when you all came along, really what you're referring to, just for a nationwide audience, is the self-manager, right? The person that was going on Vrbo and Airbnb, because you're right. 5 years ago, even in the Smokies, which is widely considered probably the biggest vacation rental market in America, it was fairly unheard of, So adapting to that schedule, I would imagine, was probably one of your biggest pain points, but it was probably also what helped build your business because to me, like those big companies, man, like your Orkins and your Terminex and et cetera, they might do what you're looking for them to do, but they have a system, you know what I mean? And the short-term rental system is different. You know, you have to be able to, I was talking to a new guy, just started a company down the street from me yesterday. And I was like, can I give you my iCal? And he was like, what's that?
Yeah. So that was one of the things that we had to adjust to was iCal links, hospitable, guesty, hostaway. There's just, the list goes on and on. And yeah, when I'm referring to when you guys came along, I'm talking about all the people that were trying to learn, because ultimately it was them learning, you know, it's a learning phase, right? The people learning how to manage their own properties. People that never owned a rental property before. So they were learning, how does that work? And so what we tried to do was to make it easy for them. And my job is to make them, or educate them and have them understand how the scheduling works, and make it easy for them. Because if I make it easy for them, then I'm the guy they're always calling back, right? Well, he makes it easy. He goes through the steps, and my job is to educate them on how to do that. Because I'll actually get people call me and I'll say, do you have a link set up through one of these? And I'll start going through this list, and they're like, oh wait, I do have that one. You know, I have hospitable, or I have guesty, or whatever it is. And so they'll send me a link, and then that makes it hands-free for them. They're not having to do any work once they give me the schedule, right? Because we're checking those schedules on a daily basis. And so as we check those schedules, that's how we know how to send our technicians out. And of course, you always run into, you know, one of the things we run into, I guess the hardest part for us is the last minute bookings, right? So when we're sending out probably 100 to 150 or better cabins every single day. And so we're having to pull those midday the day before. And so as we pull them, they look like they're open tomorrow. And then somebody books it late on, you know, today's Wednesday. Somebody goes in there at 8 o'clock and books a cabin, and we don't know it. The next thing you know, we show up there and there's guests there. So we run into those problems, but that's kind of far and few between. But learning how to adjust and adapt is one of the things that we have learned to do over the years, is adapting to the needs of people that own short-term rentals.
Right. And another thing that goes along with that is when there is an issue, like a guest that says, hey, I got cockroach on the ground here. Cause we get that, you know, I hate to say it, but there are guests that will I've had them bring them with them, like dead bugs, and drop them on the floor, try to get a couple of bucks back. So if you're a new, you know, or even if you have experience and you're a self-operator out there, make sure that you have a bug guy that can, well, you know, I mean, for me, what I'm looking for is like a monthly receipt, you know, just shoot it to my email so that when that person says, hey, you've got a bug at your house, I'm looking for a refund, which they never, of course, say I'm looking for a refund, but you know what I'm getting at.
Right.
There's plenty of forums and websites out there that are like, hey, how do I get a refund from my Airbnb? You do this long enough, you can smell those people coming a mile away. And it's nice to have that receipt that says, hey, this house was treated at this time, or be able to shoot somebody a text and say, hey, can I get, you know, some sort of proof that you guys were at the house? It's just the little nuances that are much different than doing primary homes that I think a lot of folks don't really think of when they get into this business, which leads me to my next question. How do I be better as a homeowner, as the guy that's doing exactly what I'm doing, what you're used to dealing with, as maybe a new, in your case, in the Smokies, a cabin owner? How do I get this? For me, I see it all the time, people making the mistake of like not knowing how to talk to their service providers. And so how do I get better at, you know, working with you and do you ever get noobs that are like freaking out and saying, oh my God, there's a dead cockroach in my house. How dare you be terrible at this? You know,
we deal with that daily. And, you know, one of the things, I guess, I'm gonna try to answer this two-part, but one of the things is like for new people, when they call our office, they generally get me, or they'll get Justice, as my son. And we go through the process of trying to explain to them everything that we think that they're going to encounter, right? If you have this problem, if you have roaches, this is what you're going to need to do. Call in, we take care of it in this time frame. We give them every scenario possible that they could run into. And then we also go through and explain to them like when to call, how to get it taken care of quicker, and all those things. Because ultimately for us, we have like a 2-hour window, right? So our insurance company doesn't allow us into short-term rentals unless the guests are there, if their belongings are there. And that's an important thing to tell somebody, right? We tell them up front on the front end, hey, if you call me and say there's a roach at Bears Creek, then I need a 2-hour window from you so that I can get in when the guests are going to be there. And that's a challenge because then you're having the homeowner deal with the guest and then having to call you back. And so I try to shortcut that by saying, hey, the easy way to do it is, if a guest calls you and says, I've got a roach on the counter, ask them for a 2-hour window at that moment. Call my office, say, hey, they have a roach on the counter. They'll be there from 11 to 1. And then we dispatch a technician out between 11 and 1. And so that's communication for me is vital because of that reason, because I have some people that will get, especially newer ones, they get upset with us because like they'll call in and then the guests aren't there. And then the guests are at Dollywood, enjoying their vacation like they should be. But they'll call us and say, hey, the guests are going to be out. Can you run by there? And I can't, because my insurance company doesn't allow me in. And so then sometimes it may be a day or two before we get in there because they can't get the guests to respond quick enough. So a lot of it has to do with, when the guests respond as to when we can respond. If the cabin's empty, we're pretty responsive. I mean, we're out there pretty much, somebody calls me today, we try to get out there today. That's kind of how we operate. We try to make it as easy. What I try to do is make it as easy as possible for a homeowner. So I'll give you an example. I had a lady call the other day, a new one, asked her where she got her information from. She says, I bought from the short-term shop.
Hey now, shout out.
So, that's shout out. So she bought from short-term shop. So we started gathering her information. And as I went through our form that we use and we go through and we gather all of her information, and I started explaining to her how the service works, and I explained the cost, and then I explained how her credit card, us having her credit card is vital on file, and then we email receipts, and then I explained to her the hours of operation, when we're open, all these things. And as I go through a whole spiel with her, when I get done, I say, is there anything else I can answer for you? And then when the response is no, she said, I am blown away at number one, the knowledge that you have about your industry, but also how easy you make it for us new people to be able to use, vendors. And so that's important.
Absolutely. And so what you're saying here is that you niche down is really exactly what it is. And that's great to do in any business. It's good business advice in general, man. Find your niche and stick with it. Like we love these cabins. We love short-term beach houses, et cetera, et cetera. Which you do bring up a good point. Now, for any noobs out there, or even, a lot of experienced operators don't realize you cannot go in the house when it's occupied. It's similar to long-term rental, right? Long-term rental, you got to have, and I would imagine you do some of those as well, which I love them. I've got way more long-terms than short-terms. And with long-term rental, you got to give, in most states, 48 hours notice before you actually go in the home. And that's something that a lot of new folks, or hell, even a lot of folks with some experience, because there's no guidebook, handbook for when you get into Airbnb. You just got to learn from your mistakes. When Verbo, same thing. But you can't just show up and go in because, again, back to the guests doing shady stuff. They might have Googled, hey, if I just get this host to come in and I didn't have, give them permission, then I can get them in trouble and get a refund. And so I always recommend at least get it in writing on Airbnb or Verbo, whichever platform you're using, booking.com, whatever it may be, that you have the right to go in the property during this time, like you mentioned. Give me a time, and let's get that in writing, okay? And then that leads me to a question on what you were just talking about, the cockroach on the counter. Does the instant show up and treat for that cockroach actually do anything? Isn't it like a prolonged period to deal with cockroaches, or does it just give warm and fuzzies? That being said, we should probably do it anyway, but does it, and let's get into the actual nuts and bolts of the treatment here. Does that do anything, or?
Well, it's, Yeah, if you show up there and actually see the bug on the counter, you can
Right.
actually, kill it,
Shoot it dead.
but you could do that. You could do that with just a fly swatter. But no, the treatments, I mean, going in there and actually using a product to treat for bugs, it's not an instantaneous. I tell people all the time, I'm like, I call it the spot and shoot. People go to the store, buy raid, spot a bug, spray it on the wall. If they actually read the label would say, spray it in this area, and this area, and wait 7 days and repeat, right? And so the chemical doesn't, all insects react differently to different chemicals. And chemicals usually have to get into their nervous system for it to kill them, right? And so roaches crawl through chemical that gets on their feet. They stick their feet in their mouth. It gets into their system. It's not cyanide. That's what I tell people all the time. They don't just get near it and fall over dead. And so to answer your question, yeah, warm and fuzzy is probably the bigger thing. It's showing up because somebody had an issue. To me, I tell people we're actually in the people business, not in the bug business. We're to try to take away their fear or take away their problem they're having. Explain, I think what separates All About Bugs from a lot of other companies is that we take the time to educate our client, right? Or educate that guest on what's going on, how it's going to work, what's going to fix it, what's not. I always tell them what it's not going to do, right? Because that's really what they want it to do, right? So I try to explain to them how it's not going to kill them. If you go over there and there's hundreds of roaches behind the refrigerator, we're going to try to kill everything we can see right there, but it's not going to stop them from continuing to come out, right? And when they do come out, that product that we applied, it's not going to kill them on contact. They have to, it has to go through a process for it to eliminate them. But more than anything else in this industry, especially in the short-term rental market, it's about, showing up because the expectation is that you're going to take care, they're on vacation, right? The last thing they want is ants on the counter, right? I mean, it happens, but that's the last thing that they would want is for that to happen. And so when that happens, it's about how quickly you respond. It's not it's how quick, right? So can they come right now? Can you send somebody here in the next 10 minutes or 30 minutes or an hour? And it's how quickly we respond that makes all the owners look, it makes them look good, but it also lets people know that our service is second to none.
Right. And you bring, I mean, it's an excellent point. Especially when you're new, you get that message about a cockroach. You're like, oh my God, my house is gross. My bug guy's not doing his job. But really what you're doing here is you need to back up as a host and assess the situation and really just figure out what is right for that guest at that moment in time where this one random cockroach snuck in through the barrier. And figure out what the best thing to do here is for their vacation, because at the end of the day, we are 100% in the vacation business. And these folks, honestly, they, as much as a pain in the ass as they can be occasionally, they deserve to be shown a good time. They work hard, and a lot of times it's the one time they get away from their job and everything else. So as a host, step back from it for a second, put yourself in their shoes, figure out what's gonna make them, I guess, warm and fuzzy at that moment in time. And then to go further back than that, when you're going into a new house, get pest control right out of the gate. You got to get that started right away. Otherwise, you're going to see more and more, and then they'll slowly start to dwindle. But is that right, Jimmy? I mean, I would assume that's how it works. If you're waiting until you have a problem, it's too late, right?
Yeah, most of the time it's about doing the repetitive services so that the products can build up resistance to the insects. That's what you're trying to do, right? The more treatments that you do, the more resistance it builds up. When you go into a new structure that's never been treated, or somebody has an issue and you go out there, their expectation is that you're waving a magic wand and everything disappears and everybody's cool. When in fact, what it does is, in most cases, is it causes, I always tell people, if you've never had pest control here before, when I go to treat it, guess what it does? Is it forces all those bugs out of their hiding places, right? And so I always say, you're going to have an influx over the next 7 to 10 days, not a oh my gosh, I killed everything on the planet type scenario, right? And so I always say there's a good possibility that there's going to be an influx of bugs over the next 7 to 10 days. But as they come out, the products will start to kill them. So it's always better for people to start on the front end before you move into a place, before you start renting, your short-term rental, before it's okay if there's furniture and stuff in there, it's fine. But if there's an opportunity to get in there before that, it gives our service technicians an opportunity to get in locations that they may or may not get to with furniture being there. And so, but it is highly important. I think one of the biggest questions I get asked a lot is, why do I need it monthly? Why can't you just come out once every 90 days? And the hardest thing to explain to people is that products only last a certain amount of days, right? So you apply them in order to have them build resistance, you have to reapply them before they wear off. Otherwise, it's like treating it new every time you go out. And so I think that's highly important, especially in the rental market, is that I explain to all my clients, we do them every 30 days, 21 to 28 days, basically, we're servicing that property again to make sure that we're keeping it as bug-free as possible. I think one of the funniest things I got was from Dr. Vale over at the University of Tennessee. We were having a fly issue a while back, and she said, you do realize that these cabins are a crack and crevice, right? The whole cabin. Like there's no chance you're going to keep the insects out totally. And I said, totally understood. Try to explain that to a guest.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like you wanted a cabin in the woods. But there are some downsides that come with that, especially when you're doing with, a stick-built actual real log cabin with chinking and the whole 9 yards, man. There's going to be cracks and crevices, 100%. Back to that 90-day thing. I know you operate in the Smokies, but you're originally from Louisiana, and I struggle with that down here, man. I'm on the beach in Florida, and if there's any beach operators out there, or I think maybe it's really not even a beach issue. I think it's more of a small town issue. Where I'm at is a teeny tiny little vacation town, much like Sevierville. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a small town, especially if you get down into the valley or out towards Cosby, et cetera. And where I'm at, where I'm at, the population is only like 8,000 people, but you got millions coming in. So the problem with the local down here, I can't find a guy like you. And so I'm dealing with like mostly franchises, which I'm not, that's fine. It's going to still be a locally owned and operated thing. But the problem with it is, like you said, they all want to do 90 days. And so down here, just in case anybody happens to hear this and operates in an area where you can't find somebody that'll do less than 90 days, I've run into that. I'm dealing with that right now in a couple of my markets. So I've had to sign up for 90-day treatment because that's the only thing they have. And then what you do is you call for retreats every month, and they will come out. And you pay a little extra fee or whatever it is. Or you got to, I think they have a free retreat if you see something. But I just call and I say, hey, I need a retreat, and I'm happy to pay for it. Because I need it more than once every 90 days. I think 90 days is ridiculous. And unfortunately, in a couple of my markets, that's all I can get. So I just call and do the 30-day retreat thing.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. I was going to say there's very few chemicals that actually last 90 days. And so that's what I try. There are a few that say they do, but you also have to take into account the weather, what you're dealing with, the perimeter treatments, it wears down. And so it's kind of like, trying to think of the analogy I'm trying to use, but you stretch something out I'm not going to get on a bungee cord that says it will withstand, a 200-pound guy, and I weigh 198. I'm not testing it to see if it actually holds a 200-pound guy. Right. And so that's what I say about the products is that product says it works 90 days. It might work 60. And so I just tell people the easiest thing to do is, if you can find somebody that will service you on a monthly basis, to me, that's the best program possible.
Right. And again, what we're talking about here is wheelhouse. It's all about wheelhouse. These 90-day places are used to dealing with primary homes, people living in them. They got to go in there and treat around the people's belongings because they actually live there and they have their stuff. And then they got to worry about getting sued because they broke something or stole something. So, that's one of the things we got to realize as hosts. We are living in a door code culture, and it's a whole different vibe. Let's talk about individual types of bugs quickly. I know in East Tennessee, this, at least in my experience, hasn't been a huge problem, but let's talk termites briefly. Do I need at least in East Tennessee where you're at. I'm not going to expect you to speak for the entire nation, but I know there are parts of the country where they're not as, they're not as around as much. What are your thoughts on the termites?
Well, termites here in East Tennessee are obviously different than further south. We don't deal with, like in Florida, you have Formosan termites. You also deal with drywood termites. Some areas they deal with sand and desert termites. Here we only have eastern subterranean termites. And while they are bad.
Wait a minute. Are you saying that certain areas have multiple, what's the word? Types?
Yeah, they have multiple
types,
species. So like in Florida, for instance, and also in Louisiana, you dealt with drywood termites. So drywood termites have to live in coastal areas. They because they don't actually use the ground for water. So they fly into a structure and they get their moisture right out of the wood. So they never actually hit the ground. So they're not going your subterranean termites like your Formosans and your eastern subs, even the desert ones. They actually have to be able to get back to the ground to actually get water. And so they can't get water right out of the wood. So when you have termites like drywood, you have to fumigate a structure where they actually put a tin on it, shoot it with gas in order to kill it, right? Or they're using some kind of a borate product that maybe penetrates the wood to be able to kill it. So you can't do a ground treatment, like a liquid ground treatment around the structure to kill drywoods because it won't actually kill them because they don't go back to the ground to get water. When you're dealing with Formosans, originally when Formosans became a really big thing back in the 90s, they used to fumigate for Formosans. They thought that was the only way they could get rid of them. But Formosans are actually subterranean, which means they go back down to the ground. And so they can, however, build what's called a carton nest. Formosan termites can build a carton nest inside of a wall and actually holds moisture. So they don't actually, and they can cut themselves off from the ground if there's a moisture source. So if you had a leak in your roof and the termites flew into it, they could actually use the leak from the roof as their moisture source and never hit the ground. And so if you're not careful as an inspector, you could miss, like if you go out to inspect a structure, you could miss that there's actually termites there because you're just looking at the ground level, trying to figure out, are they coming up? And that's depending on what part of the country you're in, right? Every part of the country is different. In East Tennessee, everything we deal with here comes from the ground. It's subterranean. Now, the good news is that in the area where most of the short-term rentals are, the ground's really hard. It's mountainous. It's rocky, which makes it, in my opinion, a lot more difficult for termites to actually get into the structure. Probably in the last 5
also in
years,
the fact that most of these crawl spaces are made out of concrete anyway, right? So they got to build the tubes going up.
That's correct. Most of them are center block. And so the challenge that you face is they can come up the middle of those blocks and you won't see them till they actually hit the floor joist.
Because the blocks are hollow.
That's correct.
Right.
And so if they're hollow block, if they're 2-story cabins, most of them are actually solid block walls. And so, but you can actually see the tubes coming up. They have to build a tube. And just for reference, so people know, this is an education thing, the termites are blind. And so the reason they build the mud tube is because it's a protection mechanism for them. They travel through the tube to get to what they're trying to feed on. Okay. That's the reason the mud tubes are there. But in East Tennessee, I would say that probably we have treated lots of properties, but not so many cabins, right? So the cabins, to me, have lesser and lesser problems. I'm not saying they can't have problems, because the minute I tell you yours won't, it will, right? And so what I tell people when somebody calls me and says, hey, should I treat my cabin? My response to them is very simple. Treatments are going to last in the soil about 10 years. And so if you plan to keep that property for 10 years, then it's probably advantageous to have it treated, because then you have it protected, right? But you have a lot of people that flip these things. And so they come in, they buy it, they keep it for a year, and they let it go. I sometimes tell them, hey, if it was mine, I would just roll the dice, because ultimately you're going to spend $800 to upwards of $2,000 of having an initial treatment done. You're not going to get your money back from that in a year, right? You're not going to have, you're paying for protection for somebody else further down the road. And so, but in general, we have treated maybe 3 total cabins since I've been open since 2012 that have actually had termites inside the cabin.
And
right?
how bad was the damage anyway? I mean, because I bought houses that had termite damage, and you just rip out a few things here and there and replace it, and it's fine. But what was the extent of those 3 cabins?
One of them, they had to rip out a vanity because they had gotten in the bathroom wall, so they had to replace a bathroom wall, part of part of the ceiling, and maybe some floor joist and actual studs. So I mean, they probably had a couple $1,000s worth of damage. To be honest, down south, the damages are a lot worse than they are here as it pertains to termites.
Yeah, in Alabama, I've got long-term rentals in Alabama, and they do what's called a termite bond. Is that the same thing you do? They put these green pods in the ground, and then they come replenish them with whatever, like once a year or something like that. Is that how it works?
So that's actually a Centricon system. That's a baiting system. My company doesn't use baiting systems. We do liquid treatments where we actually provide a border of protection. So we would dig a trench and we would put chemical around the base of the structure. We may drill the blocks and put chemical into the center of the blocks. It all depends on the type of foundation it is to determine what the treatment is. But we
And
do
the soil.
in the soil. It's a
And
soil
in
treatment.
East Tennessee, where you're at, in East Tennessee, it's all sandstone. It's hard as a rock. That's why people don't do slabs for the most part. I mean, you can see a slab occasionally. You're never, hardly ever going to see a basement in East Tennessee. It's because that soil is so freaking hard.
Yeah, it's tough. And
Yeah.
so and that's the other thing is when you're doing chemical treatments, it has to be able to bond to the soil. Otherwise it doesn't, you got to spray a bunch of rocks. It doesn't stick to it. So you got to make sure it bonds to the soil, because when the termites pass through it, that's how the product works. It gets onto their skin and it literally just basically eats at their exoskeleton. Mm-hmm.
How do I handle mice? I get a mice. Now, mice are a little bit longer to get rid of, right? And it's about filling the holes in. Like, give me a couple minutes on mice.
Yeah, so mice, what we try to do is determine when somebody has mice inside these properties, these short-term rentals, our first goal is to, number one, figure out where they're getting in from, because I don't care how much bait or stuff you put out, it's not going to stop them from getting in. The object is stop them from getting in. So you would seal all your plumbing accesses in your kitchen, your bathrooms. We get into crawl spaces and you seal everything that I tell people, anything that pokes a hole in that bottom floor needs to be sealed. Electrical lines, cable lines, water lines, the dryer vent, anything that pokes a hole into that structure, mice can get in. The hardest part with the challenge with mice is that I tell people this, when you go out there and say, I don't need to seal that hole because it's too small, that's the one you need to seal, because that's the one they'll get in.
And the hard part is finding that hole too.
That is correct. Yeah. And so we don't actually do the exclusion work ourselves. We have a guy that does that work for us, but we've talked to him in detail about how to seal and what to do. It takes a special person to seal it. And so they have to be educated enough to make sure they're getting every single crack and crevice to make sure that the mice stay out. Then we use baits, traps, whatever is necessary at that point to try to catch or trap or bait to keep the mice from staying inside the structure.
But with mice, it is much more about keeping them out than actually killing them or
100%.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then what about, well, we already talked cockroaches a little bit. Are they the biggest problem for you as a pest guy? I mean, is that the biggest thing that we deal with or?
It's not really. I mean, I don't know that we have one that's really bigger than the other. The main things we deal with up here, like ants, roaches, spiders.
But ants, correct me if I'm wrong, the ants, they're coming for the sugar and the stuff that they left on the countertop, right? So, like, if you keep your house clean, isn't that the best way to get rid of ants, on top of obviously protecting the house as well? But
yeah, they're also driven by water, right? So all your insects need water, right? Food, shelter, water. And so their ants will come in when people leave crumbs or the property hasn't been cleaned very well. That's when you find ants trailing in, trying to find the crumbs and stuff to continue to feed on. Yeah.
Absolutely. Palmetto bugs. What's the difference between a palmetto bug and a cockroach? Is it just a sexier way to say cockroach?
I think it's just a sexier way to say it.
Okay, because that's what we call them down here in Florida. And man, those things are just unavoidable at some point.
I get the water bug thing. People are like, I have water bugs. I'm like, they're roaches. And they're like, no, they're not.
Exactly.
Yes, they are.
This episode is brought to you by Short-Term Rental Listing Advice. Join this Facebook group and post your listing to get advice from other hosts, including myself, on how you can improve your listing. Or just post your property so you can show off. join us at strlistingadvice.com. That's strlistingadvice.com. All right, let's slide into the heavy stuff now. You're in East Tennessee and in the fall, right when things start to get cooled down and before the first 2 or 3 frosts, we experience ladybugs. And first-time operators always lose it. They freak out. And of course, the reason they're freaking out is because they didn't know it was going to happen, number one, and they didn't know it was going to happen. Therefore, they did not warn their guests. So first of all, before I let you speak, I want to talk to my hosts out there. If you're in a ladybug area, eastern part of the United States, anywhere where, in the mountains, as we see them all the time out there, the most important thing to do for me as a host is I warn my guests. I have a ladybug button on my dashboard I use Hospitable, and it's just one of my templates. I turn it off because we're only talking about 2 months a year. I'll let you get into that, but I turned it on. I said, hey, just so you're aware, there will be ladybugs in this house. We cleaned every single one of them up before you got there, but they're coming. And if I always say, if they know about it before they get there, they'll be fine. Of course, if they're only driving from within 100 miles or something, they're going to be aware of it anyway. But if they're coming from Ohio or Florida, they might not be aware of the ladybugs. So talk to me about ladybugs.
Yeah, so I'm glad you asked about that. So ladybugs are very interesting in the fact that in East Tennessee, they start to actually swarm sometime around September, right? And so September, October, November, they'll start to swarm. And what they're trying to do is they're getting out and they're going to start to overwinter into the structure. So they get in around your window sills, your door frames, your door jambs, anywhere there's a crack and crevice, right? And they're trying to basically hide. And so the hardest part is actually explaining to people that treatments have to be done beforehand, not after they're there, right? So people that are calling me in January and February when they've got their heater on and there's ladybugs everywhere, it's because the ladybugs think it's springtime and now they're trying to emerge. And so the biggest challenge with that is that if you don't treat them beforehand, so if you treat them in September, like we have programs where we start treating the house in September, we coat the whole outside of the cabin down or the property down with products. So as these beetles get into it, it kills them and it will stop them from overwintering.
Wait a minute, why do you call it a beetle?
So they're Asian lady beetles.
Oh, okay, there you go.
So so some people say ladybugs, they're Asian lady beetles. They're both. But anyways, okay. So but the ladybugs, so once they get into the product, it kills them. You're trying to stop that because if you don't stop that in the spring, in March, and then I'll start getting calls. So starting in March, my phone will start to blow up because people are like, oh my God, the guests are there and there's hundreds of ladybugs inside the cabin. And unfortunately, here's the response. Okay, I'm going to send somebody out, but it's not going to stop them from continuing to come out, right? Every bit of them that hid in the fall are going to emerge whether I spray it or I don't, right? And so what I tried to do then is to put them on a ladybug list so that I can call them back in August and go, hey, ladybug's starting in September. Do you want it treated, right? And the first time they ever have an issue, I promise you they'll know that call's coming. But what you're trying to do is preventatively treat them because once they're there, they're there. And the treatments are only going to do so much. But here's a tip just for you, first-time hosts or people that own cabins. The easy thing to do with ladybugs is if they're inside there and it's nighttime, turn a light off, turn all the lights off, put a lamp down on the floor, or I had a lady do it on top of a pool table, put the lamp there and go to bed. Tomorrow morning, every bit of those ladybugs will be right there by that lamp. And then you can
because of the heat or because
of the light.
Light, okay.
Yeah, because of the light. And so they're attracted to that light and they'll go right there, and then you can just suck them all up with a vacuum.
Right.
That's the trick. Yeah. Well, and the hardest part for me is telling a guest, hey, by the way, we do have a vacuum if you want to get it out while you're on vacation and suck those ladybugs up.
It is difficult, but that's what I do. I get those Shark handheld vacuums. They're like $99. You can get them anywhere now. They're super. They're really kick ass. But about September, I start shipping them to my properties in the mountains because I'm just gonna be like, listen, There's a handheld vac over there. That's your best tool right now because
Sure.
I've already done everything I can do.
Can I tell you a quick story? I know you have
Yes.
another question, but
No,
quick
go
story.
ahead. I got a lot of questions.
When I first moved to East Tennessee, and somebody said, "Wait till ladybug season," I thought to myself, "What?" Because in Louisiana, you might see one ladybug a year. And I got up here, and the first year I went out to a property on Wares Valley, and no joke, there were millions,
Yeah.
and I mean millions of ladybugs in this cabin. And I literally stood in her study while the lady was crying with a vacuum cleaner for about 45 minutes, and I sucked up every one of them I could find. And I thought, oh, perfect. And I walked out of that room and went to the living room. And 10 minutes later, I went back in that other room, and it looked like I hadn't sucked up one. And so that's how fast they emerge out. And they were just, I mean, it was crazy. But go ahead with your questions.
Yeah. And if you've ever been hunting in the southeastern United States, you know exactly what we're talking about. They're everywhere out there. But
yeah.
All right, Carpenter Bees. Now these things are terrible, and they're very active in your area. They're terrible because they dig the holes in the house and they lay their larvae. Now I do want to say, of course, I've done mostly through many conversations with Jimmy. I've done my research. They are, for the most part, harmless. So that's another thing with the Carpenter Bees and discussions with your guests. The most important thing for me as a host is if it does come up, oh my God, there's a huge bee at this house. Is it going to get, my kids, or we're worried about our kids? They don't sting. Now, there are a few exceptions to that, I think, and that's where I'll let you take over. Do I need to treat for Carpenter Bees? Are they dangerous? And then parlay that into the whole woodpecker thing.
Sure. So do you need to treat for them? And the answer is simple. If you want to help to try to preserve the exterior of that structure, the answer is yes. The Carpenter Bees, the female is actually the one that drills the hole. She drills the hole, and then she goes into that hole, and she'll lay 6 eggs inside that hole, right? And so the next season, those 6 eggs will hatch. They'll come out of that hole. So the Carpenter Bee only drills a 1/2-inch hole. She drills a hole into the structure, and that's all the damage that they do, that one little spot. Now, the challenge is that a lot of you can, and people get on Google all the time. I just tell them to Google it. But if they get on Google and they look and see what it says about treating for ladybugs, a lot of products that they're saying to use are pyrethrins, cypermethrins, different things, any type of permethrin, because what the permethrin does is it'll keep them away. You could spray it on there, and it'll keep them away for a day or two, but then all of a sudden the bees are born right back in there, and the
what the hell's permethrin? Really, that sounds like what they give my dog when he's got worms. What is it?
It's very similar. It's the same thing, like same thing they give to dogs for fleas, right?
Okay, fleas.
Like
okay.
So, but what I'm trying to say to you is use different products. Like we use non-repellent products, right? So the bees can't see it or smell it. And so as they're boring into the structure, once it's been treated, it's going to kill them. They don't know it's there. So as they bore, the product kills them. The more of them you kill this year, the less of them you have next year. You stop them from leaving those pheromones there. And that's what you're after. But the hardest part to explain to any host or people that own a property is they don't want them boring at all. And so my response is simple. Put up metal siding, if you don't want them to bore on your wood side of the house. But you can't stop the boring process. You can't stop them from boring, and you can't stop them from swarming. Now, with that being said, the female is the only one of them that has a stinger. The male doesn't have a stinger. Okay. So they're not aggressive bees. They do hover, and they sound like helicopters next to your ears.
And they're huge. That's why.
And they're huge.
There's somebody coming in from Minnesota or wherever they don't have maybe they have them there. I don't know. Somewhere where they don't have these. They're really freaking out. They're like, oh my God, this bee is going to rip my head off because they're huge.
Yeah. I just tell people like, don't trap her. I mean, you get little kids out there trying to trap her in a jar or with their hand, if you trap her, she'll sting you, but she's not going to aggressively go after you to sting you. I swat them out from in front of my face all the time.
Yeah.
I'll hit them with my hat, things like that. But, for the most part, you're correct. They're harmless to humans.
Yeah, that used to be one of my favorite things, man. I'd sit there back in my beer drinking days. I'd sit on the porch and stare at the mountains and take like a magazine or something. Usually I like something like a lid of like a Christmas container. You put a junk in there, like something like that, nice and stout. And And you can just sit there and just whack them all day long. And it really does make a difference. Next time I come back, there's not as many of them. If you can knock out 20 or 30 of them at one time, you know?
Well, the good news is that I just tell people if they own the properties for long periods of time, they're going to notice a reduction by having it treated. The hardest part is some people's philosophy is, well, I'm not going to pay you to treat if it's not going to eradicate them. And I said, well, then you shouldn't pay anybody to treat it, because once again, I think my biggest thing is educating them up front about how it works, what it does, and what it won't do is important. And as long as I do that, then I've done my job, and then we'll continue to treat. Now, what was the other question you asked?
Well, hold on. I had one more on that. Now, these Carpenter Bees traps. Now, let me talk about that. You can get those at anywhere that there's Carpenter Bees, and it's just a mason jar with it upside down screwed to a piece of wood, and it's got a hole. And the way those things work, and Jimmy, correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, is the Carpenter Bees can get in, and they actually like it because it reminds them of the holes they're digging in the house, but they can't get out. So then, and they do work, right? I think I've always found that at least they're collecting these bees. But the problem with that and your guests is then you got a damn mason jar hanging from the house that's full of dead bees, and it is not very sexy. And I've also been told, probably by you, that if you empty the jar out, you will get less bees because they're attracted to each other. Am I right?
That's correct. That is accurate. So those things are pretty interesting. I laugh all the time when people say, do these work? And so I say, listen, they're a visual actually for the client. They're not, if you think about, I tell people this analogy: take a stick of dynamite, walk down to the ocean and throw it as far as you can. Are you going to kill some fish? Yes, but you're not going to put a dent in what's actually in the ocean, right? So same thing with these bees. They're not going to, they're more for a visual to say, oh, great, he's got these traps up. The host has these traps up, so they're trying to do something to mitigate what's going on. And that's what they are. They're more of a visual than anything else. Dr. Vale at UT says they're useless. So
I tell you what, they are beautiful, man. I mean, I actually kind of like when they're around, a few of them, one here or there, because they are really cool looking.
Yeah.
And then furthermore, for my hosts out there, anybody that's not familiar with this, you can fill those holes in pretty easy on your siding or in your log cabin. And generally, you're going to need to get your cabin stained. Of course, we're talking East Tennessee and of course, North Carolina at this point. But you're going to need to get your property stained every 5 to 10 years. Exactly like painting a house, except for you're going to use stain because it's slightly see-through is really the only difference there. And usually the stain guy will go around and fill those holes in before he stains, and then he can make it kind of look like those holes aren't there anymore. It's just part of it, I mean,
one of the things that I do, not to cut you off, but one of the things that I do is I explain to most of the hosts is, like, if the bee holes are not, some people get out there and they're real anal retentive. I need to seal up those 6 holes. And I often try to tell them, I'm like, here's the deal. If they're not bothering you, leave the holes there. The bees will go back to some of those same holes next year. If you seal all of those holes, you force them to drill more holes. Okay. I'm not telling you that you won't find a few more holes here or there that they've drilled, but if you go through there every year and you seal up 20 holes, next year they're going to drill 20 more holes in different spots, right? If you leave those 20 holes, you might only end up with 25 holes at the end of the year, instead of 20 new holes that you're having to actually fill in.
Interesting. And then parlay that into the woodpeckers, because they go in there and make it bigger.
Yeah, so the woodpeckers go in and peck the larvae out. And the hardest part with the woodpeckers is, in East Tennessee, is they're protected. So you can't kill them, not on purpose. And so there's lots of things that you can do. And again, you're talking about it being sexy. It's not sexy when you have to hang reflectors and other things off the side of the cabin, or these noise makers or things like that to deter the woodpeckers. Because once the larva's there, them woodpeckers have a sense for it, and they will get over there. Because I'll have people call me and say, I need to fix this carpenter bee damage. And I'll say, well, is it carpenter bee damage, or does it look like somebody took a hatchet to the side of the house? And they're like, no, that's exactly what it is. And so then I know it's woodpecker damage.
Right.
And so that definitely needs to be fixed. But if it's actually just a drill hole, 1/2-inch drill hole on my cabin, I'm leaving it, because if they're going to use that one again next year, I want them to use it, because the products that All About Bugs is putting out is going to take care of it.
Yeah, it's a fine line with the woodpeckers. Well, with the carpenter bees, because like you said, I mean, you cannot just straight up get rid of them. But if you don't do anything, then next thing you know, your woodpeckers have completely destroyed the fascia under the roof and things like that. And you can't have that at all, because then you're going to have leaks and rot and all this other stuff. So, okay, great. Let's slide into everybody's favorite topic, bed bugs, man. So this is a huge one for hosts because it ruins about a week of your life. But talk to me about bed bugs.
So, yeah, one of the hardest things with bed bugs is that, and again, I keep talking about educating, and a lot of times people that travel, if they don't travel a lot, they take one vacation a year, they go into locations, they don't realize that bed bugs are in those locations. Bed bugs are spread by people, right? They're attracted to carbon dioxide. So most of the time, how they get transferred from one place to the next is by somebody. And so the challenge for host is that you can't control who's bringing them and who's not, right? You don't know who's bringing them and who's not. And the hardest part is when you have a guest into a structure, they find bed bugs. The process of actually getting rid of those bed bugs, you're having to deal with a lot of factors, right? You're having to deal with the guests are there. Are there bed bugs there? Are there not? Then the process of figuring out what to do as far as, do they stay in that property? Do they leave that property? And then what types of treatments are available for the host? And I'll kind of go through those, because bed bugs can be very tricky. And so in the overnight rental market, you have people that do heat treatments. There's propane heat treatments. There's electric heat treatments where they go in and actually try to physically heat each room into the cabin to a certain temperature. Bed bugs will start to die at about 123 degrees. So it has to be pretty hot, and it has to be a prolonged heat. So it has to go from, it has to be for 4 or 5 hours that you're keeping it at that temperature. The challenge that I've run into, because I used to do heat treatments, the challenge I ran into using the heaters is that if the bed bugs find cold spots, so if they get behind a tongue and groove wall, if they get down into these log beds, the log furniture that is very nostalgic at these cabins, then you go and you heat treat it. The minute it cools off, the bed bugs come right back out. So that there's one big challenge with heating. The other way to treat them is there's a company that does fumigations up here. And so they actually takes about 32 hours to fumigate a structure, and they shoot gas into it. They're the only company that I know that offers a 100% guarantee that when they leave, there's no live bed bugs in that structure. And so that's a way that it can be treated. And then lastly is one of the things that we actually do is we use a product called Apprehend. Apprehend is a fungicide, not an insecticide. So it'll stay on the surface for up to 90 days wherever you use it. So you'll be spraying it like on your bed posts, your rails, the nightstands, the dressers, your bunk beds, futons, all those things. And the way it works is the bed bugs, as they're looking for food, they crawl near that product. It clings onto them and eats them from the outside. And so the challenge for you guys that are listening out there today, the challenge for you hosts is to understand that anybody you have into that structure can bring bed bugs in that structure, whether that be me or my guys. It could be other vendors, your cleaners, especially your cleaners. But anybody that does work in there for you can bring them in there, and also any guest. So what I try to do is if you hire All About Bugs and we're on your team, when you have a problem, we actually will get on the phone with your guest and educate them and try to explain to them why the bed bugs are there, how they might have got there. The hardest part is explaining to them that they might have brought them there, right? They will never believe that, but I do explain that to them, because I explain to them what their mode of operation is. But I also start asking questions to your guests, and that is like, where have you been? Where did you go? Right? Did you go down to a theater in town? Because if we go into a property and only find one bed bug, it's a very good possibility that they brought it, right? But it could have been there before they got there. But just educating them on how they operate will most of the time keep you host from receiving a bad review. That's my job, right? My job is to get on the phone with the guests and say, this is what it is. This is how we can help you. We're going to make sure you're not taking them home. We do all that for you to try to make sure that you don't have a bad, your guests don't leave you a bad review. But if bed bugs are there, you can assure you, sometimes they'll want to stay. This is the last thing I'll say about it. If you're a host, if I owned a cabin, do not allow your guests to stay if there's bed bugs there. Find them somewhere else to go. Right?
Why would they want to? That's disgusting.
It is. Well, you'll have guests say, I'll just stay the week. But what they're wanting to stay for free, because then they'll stay, which eats up and then you're going to refund them their money. So don't do that. That's my.
Yeah,
that's my
I hate to say it, but if you got bed bugs, you got a lot bigger problem. You're getting that bad review and then some. But talk to me about because I've always had good luck with. I don't think you'd treat bed bugs anymore personally, but you've got a lot of experience with it. But I've always loved the heat, man. If I had great experience with the heat, but I've seen some folks online in the short-term rental circles poo-pooing it a little bit lately. So what if you got them in the house you live in tomorrow? How would you treat them?
So I would use a steamer. I have commercial steamers. We still do some steaming. Steaming it will actually get you direct treatments to the areas hot enough that would kill them. And then I would also use apprehend. Heat treatments, to me, listen, I used to do heat treatments. I ran around the county for years doing heat treatments. The challenge I ran into was mostly the walls and the beds. And so I was having problems. I heated a property, for instance, up. I had a property and I heated it to 165 degrees 5 times. And every time I heated it, a week later, there were still bed bugs in the room. We treated it one time with apprehend and haven't had a call back in there since. And so it's because of the way that it works and how.
So what is apprehend? Is it a chemical or a powder or like liquid?
It's actually a fungicide and it's sprayed out in liquid form. It looks like an airbrush machine that you apply it with. And so what it does is when you apply it, because it's a fungus, so it literally eats at them from the outside. Like bed bugs have a piercing mouth part like a mosquito, so they suck blood. So they can't do like a roach and walk through the product and then put their feet in their mouth for it to kill them. So what this product does is it actively searches them out as they walk by, clings onto them and eats them from the outside. Once they enter the product, in 4 to 10 days, they're dead. So what I tell people is it doesn't stop people from bringing them there. What it does stop is them from setting up shop and causing you havoc, because once they enter the product, 4 to 10 days, they die. So it doesn't allow them to keep reproducing and reproducing and reproducing.
Do you have any experience with? I had a bed bug guy that that's all he did. He did heat. I really dig him. But he put these. He called them traps. So after he treated the home, he put a bed bug trap under each bed, and it was a little silver cup, looked like a little tiny dog dish, honestly. And then he said it had pheromones in the middle of it. And he goes, "Listen, here's the deal. Just have your cleaner check that every time she cleans, because if there's one bed bug in this house, it's going straight to this trap." Are you familiar with these at all? How do I find them? Can I get them myself?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that trap exactly. They do make some products that you can actually, because the pheromone itself doesn't attract the bed bug, right? Carbon dioxide does. And so if that trap doesn't actually release carbon dioxide, there's not going to be a whole lot of attractiveness to the bed bug, right? They have a couple machines. They've been on back order for a while. They're called Night Watch, and you could set up a night watch in there after you've treated a room, and it actually has a CO2 cartridge and it spits out CO2. And so that then the bed bugs see it and it glows red. So then they think, okay, well, that's blood. And so then they're attracted to it. They climb up the side wall of that thing and they slip down into a little tray and it catches them. Those are the only ones I really know about. I'm not sure about the one you're talking about.
Well, I'll be honest. The ones that I'm talking about, I don't know what they are. They looked a little on the cheap side. So this Night Watch might be pretty cool. You said they're pretty hard to find right now, though.
Yeah. The hardest thing is in an overnight rental is don't red flag yourself, right? For me, I would never leave those bed bug monitors in a overnight rental, right? For the cleaner to check when they come. Because then you're going to have guests calling, taking pictures of it and going,
right,
what is this and why is it here? Or it's got 3 bed bugs in it and I'm not staying here, so. And
who's to say that the cockroach won't get in there, and then the next thing you know, they think that I've had that before, where they send a picture of a baby cockroach and they say you got bed bugs.
Any bug found in the bed to a client is a bed bug.
Exactly.
I get it all the time.
By the way, speaking of, when that happened to me, when I got a picture of that little baby bed bug, there's an app. Let me see if I can find it. Give me just a second. Basically, upload the picture from your phone to the app, and it'll tell you exactly what that bug was. That thing saved my ass big time one time when somebody's trying to say I had bed bugs. I just found it on the App Store on my iPhone, so just search for Bug Finder or something like that. You'll find it, and it worked.
One of the things I would say to all you hosts out there is this: don't always take the word of the client, right? Get it inspected. I just tell them, if they call and say they have bed bugs, the first thing I'm asking them for is send me a picture or video, something of that nature, and let us go out and visually inspect it. Don't just assume that they know what they're talking about.
Yep. Well, listen, we'll do another one someday on what to do with, bed bug protocol. But listen, Jimmy, you're fantastic, man. You're my bug guy, dude. I mean, you know what I mean? I listen to you talk, I'm like, this is my guy. You know what I mean? So right. I'm not going to go out and get some idiot that just started working 3 days ago for the big giant company. I want the dude that's going and taking the top. What were those flies we had this year again?
They were interesting.
What were they called? They had a name, right?
Well, yeah, I have to look it up. They weren't cluster flies.
Oh, they weren't.
They were not. I had actually brought a bag of them over to UT, and they identified them. And there's some long drawn out name, but I'll anybody that needs information about that in the Smokies, if you're listening, reach out to me, and I'll send you an email of exactly what UT found out about those things, because it's pretty interesting.
Yeah,
I thought it was cluster flies, but they were just like thousands of them in some of the cavities.
It was the weirdest thing. We had like less ladybugs this year and way more like these flies that came out of nowhere. Never had them before. Do we expect those to come back next year?
We hope not. I'll be honest. I've been open since 2012, and that was the first year I've had that experience with them. So she says that they're not really an annual thing. It's just kind of random that they showed up.
Well, look at that. All right. Well, listen, man, you rock. It's awesome to have you on. And what's the name of your company again, in case I want to find you in the Smokies?
All About Bugs.
And you have a website, I would assume.
allaboutbugstn.com. You can also find us we have Instagram and also Facebook.
Does your bug guy have an Instagram? If not, call Jimmy. Before we go, tell me a good book you've been reading lately.
So I've got a book. It's called by Mac Anderson called "You Can't Send a Duck to Eagle School." And it's a leadership book.
Oh, so really? I say that all the time. I actually have an eagle tattoo. If you want to fly with the eagles, don't swim with the ducks. So that's great. Show that. You had a copy of it there, didn't you?
Yeah, I've got a copy of it here.
You can't send a duck to Eagle School. You read it? It's good?
Yeah. It's very good. It's a short read, but it's very good, and it's enlightening for you people out there that are either trying to hire vendors or hire employees. I mean, it works. It's a very good book. So if you
I have not heard of that. That's a perfect book. I'm listening to that. I'm gonna download that right now and do my Audible thing. All right, Jimmy, you rock, man.
Have a good day. See you.
All right, later.